your host, Nathan Greenstein.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today, the second webinar in the ROS Data Dashboard series. And today is all about answering your questions. So Jean, could we switch to, oh, perfect. There are the slides. All right. So you likely remember us from the first webinar, but I'll give a couple quick introductions. You have already met Jean from Apt Associates, who will be helping keep everything run smoothly today. And Caroline, also from Apt, will be helping with Q&A and polls. And I am Nathan from Apt. And we're also lucky to have with us Trey and Dina from HUD, who will be joining us once again. So thank you all so much for being here. Without further ado, I think we can get started. Today, we are going to start by reviewing some of the most important basic information about the data dashboard. Then we'll focus on some tips and resources related specifically to data quality. And then we'll move into the question and answer portion, first focusing on the frequently asked questions that we've already received from you, and then moving into a live Q&A where you'll have a chance to ask anything that hasn't already been answered. Now, during the webinar, you're welcome to use the Q&A feature to ask a question at any time. That's over in the bottom right corner, as Jean just demonstrated. And we'll also open it up to questions over the air later on. So let's begin by reviewing some of the most important information about the data dashboard. And if you saw the last webinar, you'll probably remember this. But for anyone who didn't, and for the sake of reviewing the most important information, I want to touch on it one more time. So first, the data dashboard is designed to visualize the data that ROS grantees like you submit to HUD every year. And most importantly, to show you how you're performing based on that data. The data comes from the annual reports that you submit to HUD already. And the current version of the dashboard has data from the fiscal year 2017 through 2019 reporting periods. Now, the dashboard can help you see the reach and the progress of your ROS work in a way that's focused on program priorities like services provided and participant outcomes. It can also help you compare your program's activities and outcomes to those of similar grantees. And finally, we're hoping that it can help you identify where and how you can strengthen your performance, including the ways that better data submissions can more accurately reflect your performance. Now, we want to hear from you before we go any farther. We're curious how many of you have been able to spend some time exploring the dashboard already. There's no pressure here because we know it's only been available for a few weeks, but we're hoping that some of you have had a chance to take a look around. And as a reminder, just like last time, we'll only share the overall results. No one's name or any particular information like that will be displayed. So why don't we go ahead, Jean, and leave this open for about a minute and give folks a chance to answer, and then I'll have Caroline share the results with us. Go ahead and take just a moment to answer this poll over on the right-hand side of your screen. Why don't we leave that open for another 30 seconds or so.
I just want to remind everyone that you have to click submit or else we won't actually get your results.
All right, I think we can go ahead and close that whenever we can. And Caroline, can you share what you see of the results with us?
Sure. So it seems like not many folks have been able to explore the dashboard a lot, but about the same amount of folks, about 50 each, were able to explore either a little bit or not at all yet.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And that makes sense. I know it's hard to do a lot of exploring in just the 2 weeks that the dashboard has already been available. So this is helpful, and we're glad that, that so many of you have already had a chance to explore a little bit. So we want to hear in a little bit more detail from those of you who have had a chance to take a look. So if you would, go ahead and open the chat at the bottom right, and I think the button looks similar to this, but it will also say chat next to it. And we'd like you to share the most interesting thing that you've learned from the dashboard so far, of those who've had a chance to take a look. Go ahead and open the chat and type a message to all panelists, and you can send that by pressing enter. And that won't be shared with the group directly, but Caroline will pick a few examples to read out to everyone. And again, that won't be connected with your name or anything like that, just the answer itself. Go ahead and take a few minutes to write up your answer and let us know if you have any issues doing that. Can take about 1 more minute here. All right. Caroline, would you like to share a few of the answers that you've seen come through the chat?
Yeah, so a lot of people are saying that they enjoy being able to see what other grantees have achieved and compare it with their own grants. Another grantee said that the dashboard is user-friendly and it's great to see all of their data together. One grantee said that they've learned that their program is performing well as it relates to the data in their state, so again, that comparison. One grantee noted that the visuals make it a lot easier to pull statistical differences in areas of strengths and weaknesses. And in that same line, somebody said, I have learned that some of my data completeness or quality is lower than I had expected it to be. This is good to know so that I can look into what I need to do differently to improve my data.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I think we can go ahead and close the chat again, Jean. So it's really wonderful to see that folks have had positive experiences so far. And I hope that everyone gets a chance after today to take a look around the dashboard, especially those who haven't had a chance to do so yet. And I'm glad in particular that the issue of data quality came up, and that's something we're going to talk about later on today. So I'm happy to see that there's interest in that. Okay, thanks everyone for your willingness to share your experiences so far, and we appreciate it. All right, the next piece of background information that we'd like to review is how to access the data dashboard. Now, we went over this last time, so it might look familiar, but again, I think this is one of the most important pieces to emphasize. So one of the easiest ways to get to the dashboard is from the HUD Exchange ROS program page, and that is available at hudexchange.info/programs/ROS. It's on the screen right there. Now, once you're on this page, you can scroll down until you get to the center about where you see the ROS-SC Data Dashboard section. And from there, you can click that link at the very top, and a new tab will open with the dashboard itself. And from here, you don't need a login or a user account or anything like that. You can simply start exploring. And you are also able to use your web browser to bookmark this page and come back to it later without needing to go through the HUD Exchange website. All right. Caroline, are there any questions that we should answer before we move on?
Nothing right now.
Okay, excellent. now let's get into the tips and resources that we have for you relating specifically to data quality. This is an area that we've gotten a number of questions on already, and it's also one of the relatively complicated parts that we wanted to spend a little bit of extra time focusing on. So we're going to go through some resources and some tips and walk through a couple of examples today. But I also want to let you know that you don't need to worry about memorizing everything that we go over because it's a lot of information. We are in the process of developing a quick reference guide related to data quality that will have all of this information and more. And we'll be publishing that to share with you in the near future. So this is a little highlight of some things to come, but we hope it's enough to get you going and exploring your data quality for now and answer some of the first questions. So the first resource we want to share is one that many of you have discovered already, and that is the data availability page within the dashboard. Now that's available from the home page by clicking the data availability thumbnail at the top row in that basic metrics section of the dashboard. Now off to the right on the slide, you can see a visualization of part of that page. And the way that this is laid out is that each section of data elements are grouped together in a column. And these are data elements that are related to a particular category like case management or demographics or education. A data element is just any particular piece of information that you're asked to provide each year in your report for each participant. So that could be something like whether a service was provided or the amount of earned income or the gender of a participant. Now, what we encourage you to do right now is to explore these different categories with an eye for which ones are priorities for your particular program and your particular grant. So if I'm a grantee that focuses very heavily on education, but I don't really serve very many elderly people or people with disabilities, then I'll probably be focusing more on this education column than I will on the elderly/disabled column that is next to it. The way that these columns are structured is that we have a series of circle indicators and percent values. And each of those represents a particular data element. And the very first one is the average of each data element in that category. So we can see here demographics at the very top says 71.5%. And within that section, we have a couple 100s and a couple in the 50s. So this first value at the top is the average, and below it, you can hover your mouse over specific circle indicators or percentages to see which data elements they correspond to. And this is the first step that we encourage you to take, is spending some time on this data availability page within the dashboard, exploring where your data availability is good and where there might be some room for improvement. We particularly encourage you to look for patterns in the areas that you might be able to improve on. That could be things like, well, maybe our quality is pretty high for demographics, but maybe it's a little bit lower in general for services, or maybe it's a little lower for participant outcomes, something like that. The idea there is that any patterns that you can find in your areas of data quality that could involve some improvement will be something that you can translate into a change in your data recording or your reporting practices that will be really high impact. So by looking for patterns here, we hope that you can identify some of the most impactful changes that you can make. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. The next resource that we want to mention is the ROS Data Guide. And this is available as well on HUD Exchange right below the link to the dashboard. The main thing we encourage you to use this resource for is looking up the data elements where your availability is low. So in the data availability page of the dashboard, once you identify an area where you'd like to improve, you can flip over to the data guide and begin to look at how you might actually go about making an improvement on that particular data element. You can learn what the element means, whether it's required for you to report on it, and the allowable responses. Now, this data guide is updated periodically, and there's also on HUD Exchange a webinar that Trey has hosted with a lot more information. So we do encourage you to take a look at that. All right. Now, we are going to go through some examples in a minute, but I want to start with some general guidelines that you can follow to increase your data quality. Maybe the most important thing to know is that leaving something blank will always lower the data availability score. And that's because a blank data element doesn't let us differentiate between what you know and what you don't know. In other words, if you know that nothing happened for a particular data element, for example, maybe you know that a participant did not receive a particular service, or you know that they did not earn any income, then tell us that. Now, of course, if you don't know whether something happened or not, then that's the best time to use the information not collected option for when you are unsure. But the easiest way to increase your data quality is often to explicitly report when you know that something did not happen. Doing that might involve following up more directly with service providers that you've referred participants to so that you can find out from them whether the service was actually provided, even when it wasn't. Now, broadly speaking, we encourage you, after looking at the dashboard and the data guide, to make a plan for the data quality improvements that you want to focus on, and then stick to that plan. And that is the best way to get more green circles on the data availability page in the dashboard and increase your data availability scores across the categories that are important to you. Okay, now let's go through a couple examples of data elements and how to improve their quality in your reports. So first, I want to take a look at job development service. This is very similar to many service elements across the data guide. So the focus here is not so much on job development in particular as it is on how to report high quality data for a given service. So this is an excerpt right here from the data guide. And let's assume that I, as a grantee, have looked at the data availability page in the dashboard and seen that job development service is an area where I would like to improve. I want to first draw your attention to the comments column off to the right. Beyond the definition of job development service, which says here, contacting an employer directly for the purpose of obtaining possible employment, beyond the definition, it tells us that we can count that if the service is provided by the ROS service coordinator, but also if it was provided by a partner or a service provider. So when thinking about data quality here, it's important to think not only about whether you are providing that service, but also about whether you're connecting participants with a service provider who then provides the service. So maybe that's happening, and maybe you're not always recording it. Maybe the loop isn't always closed with those service providers, and so you're not always fully certain whether the service was actually provided or not. And this could be a case where increasing your communication with the service provider would allow you to increase your data quality here. The second question to ask yourself is whether you're telling us everything you know, even when you know that nothing happened. So let's zoom in on the response options. And we've reproduced these here. So first of all, like I said, if you leave an element blank, that will always reduce the data availability score. So try to avoid that whenever possible. Next, we see that if you select 77, which is the placeholder for information not collected, that will also decrease your data availability score. And that's because that option is designed to be selected when you aren't sure whether something happened or not. So if you connected a participant with a service provider, but you haven't been able to find out whether that provider actually delivered job development services or not, then that would be a good time to select information not collected. But if you did follow up with your service provider and you know that job development was not provided, then you can select 3, NA, and that will increase your data availability score. And of course, if you know that job development was provided, you can select 1, yes, and that will increase your data availability score as well. And again, this is true of pretty much every service. Leaving it blank or selecting information not collected will reduce your score, but selecting yes or NA will increase it. Okay, let's walk through one more example with a demographic field. So this is another excerpt from the data guide specifically for the gender data element. And this is a pretty fundamental data element, but there are a lot of cases where the data availability isn't as high as we'd like. So let's start in the data guide and look at that comments column again off to the right. The biggest takeaway here, I think, is the suggestion about data sharing. It acknowledges that sometimes ROS service coordinators don't have immediate access to all of the demographic information that might be available. So that column has some advice on how that might be addressed. So that's a good way that data quality for this element could be improved, just simply by making sure that you're communicating with whoever the best contact might be for you to get some of this information if you're not collecting it directly. Now let's zoom in again on the response options column. This one is a little bit more complicated than most of the services, including the one we just looked at, but I think you'll see that the basic pattern is really the same. So in short, leaving it blank or selecting information not collected will reduce your data availability score, but selecting anything else will increase it. And I want to note here that even selecting individual refused or individual doesn't know will not count against you. That is completely fine. That will increase your data availability score. The goal here is not in any way to pressure service coordinators or participants into providing any information that they're not completely comfortable providing. We just need to know what you know and what you don't know. So if you didn't ask or you didn't attempt to collect the information, then go ahead and select 77. That is the correct answer in that case. But if you did ask, you did attempt to collect the information, and the participant wasn't willing to answer, then it's perfectly acceptable to choose 88, individual refused, or 99, individual does not know. And that will not count against you in any way. All right, so now we want to hear from you again. Based on this quick overview of data quality, do you see any ways that you might be able to improve your data? Jean, we can go ahead and open that poll.
Sure thing. Hang on.
Thank you. And we'll give folks a couple minutes to answer this. And again, we won't share your name or anything like that, just the overall results. Can leave that open for maybe another 30 seconds, Jean. All right, thank you. Caroline, do you want to go ahead and tell us what you see in the answers?
Yeah, so I see that the most common response from grantees on the call today is that they see a few ways that they might be able to improve their data. The second most common response is that people saw lots of ways to improve their data.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it. And we'll continue developing these resources, and we'll continue to answer questions related to data quality as we go. And thank you for all of this so far. All right. Are there any questions, Caroline, that we should answer before moving on?
Yes, so a couple of questions have come in asking when the data that was submitted last month will be reflected in the dashboard.
Oh, good question. We will actually get to that in just a minute, so I'm going to hold off on answering that for a couple minutes more, but we will get you your answer. Don't worry. Anything else that we should address before we move on, Caroline?
That's all right now.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's move on to the main event for today, which is the question and answer section. We're going to start by going through answers to the most frequent questions we've received so far, and then we'll open it up live to anything that hasn't been answered yet. All right. So the first question is, was the first webinar recorded? The answer is yes, it was recorded, and we will publish a video of that recording with captions, and that will be available soon on the HUD Exchange. Now, this webinar is also being recorded, and we'll share it in the same place. Next, how does my data get into the dashboard? Is it directly linked to the online data collection system? The dashboard is based on data that you have already submitted. This is drawn completely from your yearly reports that are submitted to HUD for review. And once those are approved, they are added to the dashboard automatically. You don't need to do anything differently. You don't need to collect any new data or submit anything to a new place. As you continue turning your annual reports into HUD, the tool will be automatically updated with the results of those submissions. How often do I need to update my data? Can I update it more often than the required amount, for example, quarterly? Now, because the data is based directly on your annual reports, it is updated once a year after you submit that standard annual report to HUD. And this is all to avoid creating extra work for grantees. We don't want to create an entire second data reporting process that you need to worry about. So, of course, we encourage you to invest in capturing high-quality data throughout the year, but you only need to submit one report each time. When will I see my most recent data in the dashboard? We are hoping to add the fiscal year 2020 reports that you just submitted early in the new year, but the exact date depends on the review process with HUD and how much follow-up is needed. So we will notify you as soon as those new reports are added, but we do appreciate your patience as we work with HUD to make sure that those are ready to be added to the tool. Can multiple users access the dashboard to make updates? Well, in this case, because the updates are made automatically based on your annual submissions to HUD, there is no separate user account that needs to be created for this. So however you normally go about your annual reporting process will automatically filter into the tool. I'll note that anybody can use the dashboard to explore the existing data, and you don't need an account of any kind to do that. Is the dashboard compatible with family metrics? The dashboard should be compatible with any case management software that you use. As long as you're able to submit your annual reports to HUD using any of the accepted methods, then the dashboard will be loaded with your new data each year without you having to worry about compatibility. Does the dashboard cause any changes to the reporting process for ROS grantees? No, no changes. You can continue submitting your annual reports as usual. We will do the work with HUD each year to update the dashboard based on your new data, and you won't need to take any action. Now, that said, we do hope that the dashboard and these webinars and the direct technical assistance can help you find ways to improve your data, but the reporting process itself has not changed. Looking at the dashboard, I discovered a mistake in my data from a previous report. How do I correct that? Typically, HUD doesn't accept changes to past reports. There are certain exclusions that can apply to that, like removing personally identifiable information that was included by mistake. But in most cases, we encourage you just to focus on improving the data in your next report and not worry about going back to adjust a previous report. How will the dashboard affect my fiscal year 2020 application or future grants, especially considering COVID-19? We can't speak in detail to any future grant applications here, but we'll refer you to the NOFA as the best source of information about this and call your attention to the fact that data reporting is part of the review criteria. In terms of COVID-19, HUD did give the fiscal year 2020 applicants 90 days to apply due to the pandemic. And we can't speak to future NOFAs directly, but we do encourage you to adopt the assumption that data reporting will remain a factor just as it has been in the past. And HUD will certainly continue accounting for COVID-19. I have 2 consecutive ROS grants. Will the dashboard show both of them? So yes, the dashboard will show data for both grants together, and that includes grouping those data for visualizations that show changes over time. I will note, though, that only your most recent grant number will appear when you search for your grantee by name. So even if you only see the most recent grant number, your previous grant should still be included behind the scenes. That said, if you did submit a report for fiscal year 2019 or earlier, but you don't see it in the dashboard, then please let us know about that, and we'll try to figure out what's happening there. How can I track changes in my performance over time? For this, we encourage you to explore the Services Over Time page and the Outcomes Over Time page in the dashboard. Those have helpful overviews of this. Additionally, all of the pages in the Outcomes in-depth section have more detail. We're not going to spend a lot of time exploring these pages today because that will be the focus of a future webinar, but we encourage you to take a look at these pages in the dashboard. All of these show how data has changed between years. Of course, though, if you've only submitted one report so far, then you won't see this information yet just because we only have 1 year of your data. How can I compare myself with similar grantees, for example, by region, size, or population served? To do this, we encourage you to look at the Services Over Time page and the Grantee Service Comparison pages in the dashboard. And again, we'll spend more time examining these in depth in the future. But both of these pages allow you to compare yourself to other grantees, and you can choose ones that are similar to you based on the populations that they serve. And for grantees in the 2019 cohort or later, the area of need that was selected as a focus or a priority in the application. We are considering adopting other ways to filter, like region and size, as enhancements to the dashboard in the future. So let us know if this is a priority for you, because we're right now in the process of gauging interest in those new features. How can I print visualizations from the dashboard? Best way to do this is to scroll to the very bottom of the page and click the download button, which is the one circled here. It's a little box with an arrow coming out of it. And in the window that appears, as you see to the right, you can select image or PDF, and that will download something that you can print out. Similar question, how can I export reports from the dashboard to Excel? This has one extra step, which is going to the home page of the data dashboard, and at the top right, clicking the blue Data Dashboard Tables button, as shown on the right here. That will take you to another page where you can select the table that you want to download, and from there, you can scroll back down to that same download button we used before, only this time, instead of selecting image or PDF, you can select Crosstab, and that will produce an Excel file. How can I automatically select my own data anytime I want to visit the dashboard? The best way to do this is to select your grantee in the dashboard, then visit the home page. From there, you can scroll to the very bottom of the page and click the button right next to the download button, which is the one circled here in green with 3 dots and 2 lines connecting them. In the window that appears as you see on the right, you can copy the URL from the box that says link and use that to make a bookmark in your web browser. And anytime you visit that bookmark, it will take you directly to the home page of the dashboard with your data already selected. All right, and finally, how can I zoom in to see the dashboard better? Best way to do this is to use your web browser's built-in zoom function to make the dashboard's visualizations larger. In most web browsers, you can zoom in by pressing Control+ on the keyboard or by clicking the button in the URL bar. This is often a magnifying glass like the one that's pictured here. All right, those are the most frequently asked questions that we've received so far. So now we have a good long time to answer any questions that we haven't already. So the best way to ask a question is to type it out for us using the Q&A panel on the bottom right, as Jean showed at the beginning. And in a few minutes, we'll also open it up to questions asked out loud and over the phone. And we'll provide information about that in just a moment. But first, let's work through some of the questions that have already been asked, because I think I see a few in the queue. So Caroline, do you want to take us away with some of the things that folks have asked already?
Sure. So the first question is, will we get notified when the data entered for this year is updated in the dashboard?
Yes, we will certainly be able to notify you of that. And again, we expect that to be early in the new year, and we will provide some communication when that happens.
And similar to that question, as a follow-up, what will the process be like for 2019 grantees specifically?
I don't believe that the process will be any different. I think if you have already submitted your report to HUD, then HUD will conduct its review, and that's mainly focused on making sure that there's no personal information that was accidentally included. And once that review process is complete, we'll be able to add your data to the dashboard as usual. You won't need to take any action there. And we'll send you a notification when that has been added, and you'll be able to select yourself as a grantee and see the most recent year of data.
Great. Another question is, will you add more case management software vendors that will have the ability to upload directly to Grant Solutions?
That is a good question, and that is beyond what we are able to do with the dashboard itself. So I would need to check with some of the vendors, I think, to know more about that. But at this point, we are not making any changes to the reporting process itself via the dashboard.
Okay, and one question is, the data availability or performance metrics percentage is different from data availability or demographics category. Would you help me to understand this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on each page of the data dashboard, as you've probably seen, we have two data availability indicators. And one of them, like this question says, is labeled demographics, and one of them is labeled performance metrics. And the key difference here is that demographics refers to any data elements that we use to sort participants into different groups that are displayed separately. So many of the visualizations include separate sections for family participants or elderly participants or people with disabilities. Those are separated out because the desired outcomes are often a little bit different. So an example of demographic data would be something like age or disability status that allows us to establish those groups. And the performance metric data availability indicator is focused on pretty much everything else that's included in that visualization. So if it's looking at employment outcomes or earnings outcomes or something like that, then that data availability would refer to the earnings and employment history data elements.
So next up is a quick question. Will we receive a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, I think we'll be able to share the slide decks alongside the recordings of the webinars, and those will be posted to HUD Exchange in the near future.
Great. And next up, are new questions added to the Ross report? If so, are we notified so that we can begin tracking them?
Good question. Yeah, I believe occasionally the reporting questions do change, and that is usually communicated through updated versions of the data guide. And I'm not sure what the process is for sending notifications about that, but I'm sure that that's something that we can make happen in the future.
When you say our score will go down if we leave a question unanswered, does that include non-participants?
Good question. The answer here is that non-participants are not included in any data quality calculations. And in fact, non-participants are pretty much never included in visualizations in the dashboard to begin with. The place where you can see non-participants is on the overview section, which shows the number of participants and the number of non-participants in your data. And generally, non-participants are not included and participants are, and that goes both for performance metrics and data quality calculations. The reason for this is that in some of our early testing, we realized that by including non-participants, we were effectively bringing averages down and showing an unfair representation of many grantees' data because non-participants typically receive much fewer services. And so by including averages that were based both on participants and non-participants, we thought we might be not doing adequate justice to the work that grantees are doing. So that's why non-participants aren't included. And generally, you don't need to worry about data availability when you're reporting on non-participants.
As a follow-up to that, if working with seniors you know are not working, would you put NA or information not collected?
In this case, it's a little bit less important because if you've selected seniors, for example, as your focus area as part of your grant, then you won't be required to report on your employment outcomes for them. And so in this case, it's acceptable to select NA. You could select information not collected, and that would reduce your data availability score for that category. But again, it's not really a category for which you need to worry too much about your data availability because it's not a required category for you to report on. And all of this information is available in the ROS data guide on each element. It will tell you whether or not you need to focus on that element given your demographic that you serve or your area of need that you've selected. Let me see if I can find the example of that. Yeah, okay, so I've just pulled up that job development table again. In the comments section on the right, in the third paragraph, it says here, if you did not select employment or reentry as an area of need or focus and do not wish to report, you should select information not collected. In the case of elderly individuals, you may select NA if they're not seeking employment. And again, the data guide is your best source of information about what answers are acceptable for which populations and for which grantees.
Okay, so next, if you have submitted your FY16 report, but there is no option for cloning so that FY19 report could be updated and submitted, how can this be handled?
This is, again, outside what we are able to address using the data dashboard. So I think for this, we'd encourage you to get in touch with either your vendor or with, I believe, the Grant Solutions support would be the best way to go about that.
Okay, so my data dashboard is cut off on the right side. How do I fix this?
This is a bug in Tableau, which is the software that we use to produce the data dashboard. So the most likely reason that this might be happening is that you have made a bookmark to the data dashboard based on a page within the dashboard that's relatively narrow. And for some reason, it doesn't like to show pages that are wider than that. So the best workaround for now is to revisit the dashboard directly from the HUD Exchange program page and then navigate to whatever visualization you were looking at that was cut off. And we are going to be working on a fix for that, but it may depend on a Tableau update out in the future.
This also may be out of the scope, but one person has a question concerning Grant Solutions data input. I submitted my report and I show at least 45 plus participants. However, HUD sent me an email which only shows 10. What am I doing wrong?
This is a good question, and I think you are not the only person to run into this. I am not entirely sure how data is transferred over from whatever case management software or the Inform tool into the annual report submission. And generally, the dashboard relies on whatever the selection is that we receive, whether someone is a participant or not. There's no adjustment that's made to that. We take, without editing it, the participant status information that is submitted. So this is a case where we would want to do a little bit more investigating to figure out where those participants are losing their status as participants, where it might be that they're not being marked as that. And so this, we would encourage you to schedule a direct TA session with us, and we'll have info about that at the end. And we can sit down with you and take a look at where that might be happening. I think there are a few possibilities.
This grantee is asking, although non-participants are not counted, when I look at the data availability, it appears that it shows both participants and non-participants. Can you explain this?
I believe that it should be showing participants only. If you're seeing something different, then please get in touch with us by email. I think we would want to ask you a few questions about where that's happening. Generally, the way to check this would be to go to the overview page, look at your count of participants versus non-participants, and check those numbers against the data availability view. And if what you're seeing there doesn't match up with what you're expecting to see, then please do reach out to us and we will take a look at that.
The last question that we have right now is, do you know when HUD will allow grantees to start entering data into Grant Solutions for next year's report?
I don't know. That is a good question. I think that will likely depend on when the data review process from this year wraps up. But I think we'll probably be notifying you, or HUD will be notifying you whenever that does open up again. And we do encourage you to keep track of any records as best you can throughout the year using any software that you have adopted. And the reporting process is, again, something that can happen once a year, but data collection and recording we hope can happen year-round.
So that's the last question that we have right now in the Q&A.
Excellent. All right. Well, then let's open it up to spoken questions out loud. In order to do this, you can click the participants button at the bottom right of your screen, and you should see a little hand button towards the bottom. You can click that to raise your hand, and then Caroline can call on you and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your question out loud. And if you are called in on the phone, to raise your hand, you can press *3. That is *3 if you're dialed in on the phone.
Nathan, while you're waiting for those calls,
Yes.
I was wondering if you wouldn't mind one of the questions around why participants, but the number may be lower. Could you also explain the issue that we had around some grantees, including duplicates, and how that affected numbers for certain grantees?
Yeah, very true. Thank you, Trey. So in some cases, we saw grantees that reported in their annual submissions essentially the same person multiple times, and that is identified by the participant ID and household ID. And when those are identical, then we consider that the same person, since that's the only way that we can, essentially that we can track people between multiple years. So that is another option as to why there might be fewer participants than expected if there were duplicated participants and we only kept one copy of each of them. One other option that reminds me of is if there were any individuals whose record had personally identifiable information, then we may have had to remove that participant from the submission just for privacy reasons. All right.
So we don't have any hands raised right now, but we do have another question. I see that some of the data elements on the dashboard are not available on Ross Standards of Success. Can you explain this?
That is interesting. I would be curious to know which specific elements you are thinking of, but I think the best source of information here is, again, that Ross data guide. I think anything that is in there should be in the dashboard and vice versa. But if you're seeing something that is included in one place and not the other, then please do let us know about that with any details that you're seeing, because that is also something we can look into for sure.
Another question is, many residents got jobs and held jobs till COVID hit, but at time of the reporting, they weren't working. Is there a way to reflect success during the year rather than waiting last month before report submission?
This is a really good question, and this is something that we've been talking about internally for next year. The idea here, I think, would be providing a way to capture employment or maybe earnings, other things like that, that are typically used right now essentially as snapshots in time right before the reporting period, as opposed to some sort of the more holistic view of that outcome over the course of the year. And that's something that we're planning on discussing more internally, and there might be an update to the data guide to enable that sort of information. But it's good to know that there is increased interest in that, and we will take note of that for sure. One other thing that I wanted to add about the extra data elements possibility is there are some cases where we have included items in the dashboard that are, I think, considered optional in many other places. And those optional elements might be ones that are not included in any particular case management software, including maybe the Inform tool. And the reason there is that we want to allow grantees to report on those optional elements if they want to, but those will not count against you in your data availability scores. So even if it does reduce the average, we will not be comparing the averages to 100% as the gold standard. We'll be comparing the averages to essentially the gold standard being 100% on all of the required data elements, not including the optional ones. So if you're seeing something in one place but not another, it could be that it's optional and your case management software isn't showing it. And in that case, you don't need to worry about that being counted against you in any way.
So I see that Suzanne Garcia has her hand up.
Excellent. Jean, could we unmute Suzanne?
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for this great webinar. I know you went over this question, but I think one of my concerns is that we provide a lot of services to non-participants. For example, giving maps to, 200 plus individuals. So I didn't quite understand when you said, that would reflect poorly because we want to show what we're doing for everyone, even though they're not technically a participant.
Right. This is so helpful. We went back and forth on this a number of times, and the line that we're trying to walk here is capturing that work that you're doing in a way that doesn't reflect negatively in other places. So the question is, if we were to include non-participants in all of these averages, many grantees on average provide a lot fewer services to non-participants. And so if we were looking at something like the average number of times that a service was provided to people, then if we include non-participants in that average, frequently the number would go down fairly dramatically. And that was the reason that we originally decided not to include non-participants in those counts. That said, we definitely understand and we hear you that there's a lot of work that you do to serve non-participants as well. And we're really looking into creative ways that we can try to capture that in the future. So we would be interested to hear more from you and anyone else about ways that we might do that without risking not doing justice to the work that you do focused on your participants. So if you have interest in talking about this more, we encourage you to schedule a direct TA session, and we can do some brainstorming about the best way we might go about capturing this in the future, because we don't want to shortchange you on that work that you've done.
Perfect. Now you see why I'm not in data collection, but human services.
All right. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
All right, so another question is, if I have a participant who has a variety of needs such as medical one day, transportation one day, housing retention or rental assistance another day, do I just not count those other services if I am not getting credit for it?
Okay, I'm not entirely sure I understand what is meant here by other services. If you provide...
It looks like this grantee also asked, so with duplicate services for residents, do we give them a different number to get credit for the service?
Okay, so we collect two pieces of information for each service. One of them is whether it was provided at all, and one of them is the number of times it was provided. And so if you provide many services, or if you provide one service many times, then you'll absolutely get credit for providing that service however many times you did, provided you update your records and submit that information each time. Now, if there are services that you don't provide to a given person, and that's the expectation, right? Not every person needs every service. If you don't provide services to a given person, it's perfectly all right to select not applicable. That won't be counted against you in any way. That will increase your data availability. So generally, all we need from you is what you know and what you don't know. If you provide a service once, then let us know that. If you provide it twice, let us know that, and that will be differentiated from just once. And if you know that that service wasn't provided at all, that's not necessarily a problem. It's just something that we want to know about, and it's something that we want to know you are keeping records of. So in that case, it would be perfectly okay to select not applicable, and that would increase your data availability as well. I hope that answers the question, but let me know if I've misunderstood that, and I'm happy to clarify.
It looks like Colina Ali also has their hand raised.
Excellent. Could we unmute Colina?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to go back to, I think her name was Suzanne or Suzette, I'm not sure, in regards to capturing the non-participants' information. And I think that is really important. Here's the reason why. First of all, we know the Ross Grant is a voluntary program. And there's an enticement level that goes on in relationship building before people are willing to finally have those assessments and that individual service training plan done. So a lot of times we're working with people, we're talking to them, we may be providing them commodities, and some of the services that we do under the Ross Grant, under the hope and guise of eventually getting them to sign a couple of forms so that we can actually put it in the tracking system and say that they're part of the program. And I think, you know, it lends well to see that what we do is far more than just the people that we have with assessments and those training plans, but we do so much more, and so much of what we do is with the goal of hoping to get them to become a ROS, participant, an official ROS participant. So I think it would be great to capture that so that you can see that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work, so to speak, to get them.
Absolutely. This is really helpful, and we hear you, absolutely. I think it's great. The way that you've described that is really helpful, and I think we'll do some more thinking about the best way to capture that. But you're also more than welcome, Colleen, if you want to discuss this more, to schedule a TA session, and we'd love to talk to you about the best way that we could capture that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, somebody wants to know if they can make changes to their report, or is it too late?
If you are talking about a report that was submitted in a previous year, then I believe it's too late to make changes. But if you're talking about the report that was just submitted for 2020, then that might be possible. I'm not sure, Trey or Dina, if one of you is available to speak to that.
Yeah, I would say if you're trying to make a change to your report, I think it's best to email the Ross mailbox and explain what exactly you're trying to change. We typically don't allow folks to change their reports, but if it is of certain circumstances, we have allowed that. So I think it's just best to email the Ross mailbox and we can go from there.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you, Trey.
The last question that I'm seeing is a follow-up to your response earlier about different services for one participant. So would grantees give them another ID number?
I think
multiple.
Yeah. So we would imagine that each participant has one ID number, and when you are filling out your report for that participant, you should be able to select the number of times that a given service was provided. So it would be one participant entered one time, and for each service that was provided, you could select whether or not that service was provided at all, and then the number of times that it was provided. And that would be possible with reporting that person just under one participant ID. And that would be our strong preference. We really want each participant ID to correspond to one single unique person.
That's the final question that I saw, and I don't see any hands raised.
All right, and let's see, I see just a couple here.
I see a couple coming in now.
Excellent.
So if we're moving to a new case management software which causes us to use a different participant ID number and household ID number, is this okay?
Good question. We're just beginning to work with vendors on the best way to approach this. The most important thing is that, yes, this is okay. It won't cause any particular problems with your data or your report. The caveat there is that we won't be able to link participants over time, so we won't be able to know, say, if someone was in your program 1 year before you changed software, and again the next year after the change, we won't be able to see an improvement over time with that person because we won't be able to link them from 1 year to the next. So we're working on a solution to this, and we think that we'll be able to arrange it with we'll be able to arrange it with vendors, hopefully in a way that doesn't require too much additional documentation on your part. But right now, that is the way things will work. If you've changed someone's participant ID or household ID, they will still be in your data, just not linked to their information from before. But we're hoping to have a solution to that will take care of that link over time in the future. We've got another nearly 30 minutes that we can stay on the line. So if there are any other questions, we're happy to answer them. And again, if you're called in on the phone, you can press *3 to raise your hand.
So this question is, with the time of COVID, much work is done over email, i.e. sending out job opportunities via mass mailing. How would we capture all of these emails? We would not necessarily know everyone who took advantage of these things.
This is a good question, and I think we may end up working on some updates to the data guide in the future to try to collect some information on maybe things that are not captured in the current form. So there might be some more detailed guidance on this in the future, but what I can tell you right now is we are encouraging as much follow-up as possible in terms of capturing data on which opportunities have actually been taken and which ones maybe have not. So ways to do that might be follow-up emails after that original mailing has been sent out, maybe a follow-up survey that individuals can fill out to indicate whether they did take advantage of various opportunities that have been offered over a period of time, or like we mentioned before, direct follow-ups with partners or service providers. That is something that we would like to encourage to the extent that it's a possibility.
Is it okay if you only have non-participants?
It is okay, but we won't see any of their data in the tool, in the dashboard in its current form. And they'll be listed on that first page, the overview page, where it counts the number of participants and non-participants. But I imagine that if your report only contains non-participants, you won't see any data anywhere else.
I will add to that from a HUD perspective, it would be an issue because one of the requirements of the ROS program is that you conduct a needs assessment, that you're assessing the resident's needs to determine, what type of work or services you'll be providing. So you won't be in line with the goal of the program and the scope of the program if a good chunk of your folks are non-participants, which means that they're not receiving any sort of needs assessment.
Thanks, Trey. That's a great point. Thanks for adding that. I'm seeing a couple questions that may have gone directly to me, so I'll cover those now. One question asked what to do if your organization is not listed in the dashboard. The most likely reason for that would be that you only submitted this most recent fiscal year 2020 report, and we haven't gotten that yet from HUD's review process. So in that case, you won't need to do anything except wait for that process to complete. However, if you've submitted reports in the past, but you still don't see them in the dashboard, do reach out to us because that is something we can look into. There are a few reports that we haven't been able to include because of personally identifiable information being included in them by mistake. So that's one possibility. But we're certainly happy to work with you to figure out the root cause of that issue. Also see a question about how to schedule a TA session, and I will jump ahead to that slide, come back to it in a moment. These are available on a first-come, first-served basis, and you can book them at ros-ta.youcanbook.me. I think that's all that I'm seeing in my Q&A. Caroline, are there any others?
I'm not seeing any other questions right now or any hands raised.
Excellent. All right, then. Well, by way of conclusion, I want to leave you with a few next steps. The first, of course, is to continue exploring your data using the dashboard. We hope that all of you get a chance to take a look at what is currently in there, and especially if you have submitted a fiscal year 2020 report in the near future, early next year, that will be available for you to explore as well. As you're exploring the dashboard, we invite you to take advantage of the resources that are built in. For example, the summary sentences at the top of each page, the See Example buttons, and the glossary that you can access by clicking that question mark button on the home page. We're also developing a quick reference guide for data quality, which will contain answers to the most frequently asked questions about data quality and general best practices for improving your data quality scores. And finally, we'll be hosting another series of webinars next year talking about more advanced use and interpretation of the data dashboard. So we hope to see you for those as well. I'll remind you once again that we're going to be recording this webinar today as well as the last one, and those will be shared with you on HUD Exchange in the near future. I'll return again to the Direct TA, which is available now for scheduling. This is designed to provide one-on-one support on using the data dashboard, interpreting your data, and improving your data quality. And in order to reserve those, you can go to ross-ta.youcanbook.me and schedule a session. I believe we've had a lot of interest and we're scheduling a few weeks out into the future. So do use the little calendar buttons on that page to jump forward in time until you reach an open session. And we're sorry for the delay in that, but we promise that we will have plenty of sessions available. It looks like we've seen just a few more questions, so if anyone would like to stay on the line, I'll be happy to answer those.
So the first question is, has HUD contacted SCs of any duplications?
I'm not sure if that has happened. I believe that was mostly taken care of on the Grant Solutions side, and I'm not sure what outreach they did. Trey, do you remember any of those conversations with Grant Solutions and whether they contacted grantees? Trey, I can't hear you at the moment.
Can you ask that question one more time? Sorry.
Yeah. Do you happen to remember if when we were in the process of resolving the duplicate participants, whether Grant Solutions did any outreach to grantees who had duplicate participants in their reports?
No, they didn't. And honestly, the number of duplicates, as Nathan can tell you, was really high. It was thousands and thousands of files. I think we worked out a way on our end to mitigate that as far as how we're pulling the data. But I think with many of the cases, it was if a coordinator is entering that same person identifier in twice within the same reporting year.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for that. Yeah, so if you suspect that your report included duplicate participants, then you are welcome to reach out to us and we can see if there's any research we can do into that, but that is a possibility for sure.
The next question is, do you think Ross will ever be interested in the amount of non-Ross money invested in each participant, i.e. childcare, car repair, tuition assistance? It seems like it would add to a full review of intervention and support.
Interesting. I don't think I can speak to programmatic priorities in the future, but certainly happy to keep track of that interest. And we're always happy to think about ways we could potentially capture that sort of work in the dashboard.
Are the SFS assessment or management system going to be modified to capture COVID resources provided to residents during this time? If we are providing COVID testing, how do we capture that information?
So I can't speak to FSS, but in terms of Ross, I think that would likely happen by way of an update to the data guide. And I'm not sure if that is currently planned. And Trey, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're welcome to speak to that if there's anything you do want to share. But broadly speaking, that would come by way of a data guide update, which we can notify you about that if it does happen in the future.
Yep, I agree with Nathan on that.
Under the service category field Health and Wellness, there are various categories such as HIV services. Where is this captured when reporting OLDC?
Okay, I believe that this is one of the optional data elements, and this could account for some of the differences in numbers of elements that you're seeing. I am not sure where that appears in the Inform tool or the OLDC in general. Trey, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but I think that is beyond what we can change through the dashboard. I'm thinking the vendors might have the best answers there.
So it looks like there must have been a lot of interest in the TA sessions because one grantee is saying all TA sessions are taken except for Christmas and Christmas Eve. Are there any other options?
Oh my. I think just keep skipping forward. It should allow you to book into the next year. And we're anticipating hosting quite a few TA sessions early in 2021, especially once the dashboard has been updated with fiscal year 2020 data. So we encourage you just to scroll forward as far as you can on the booking page to see what availability works for you. And we'll be happy to work with you in the new year, especially once the data has been added.
I am not seeing any other questions right now in the Q&A.
All right. Well, in that case, I will just thank everyone once again for being with us today. I really appreciate all of these questions and how engaged everyone has been. And again, I encourage you to explore the tool as much as you can, spend some time with the dashboard, and schedule a TA session if that is of interest to you. And I'll leave you with that. And thank you so much again for your time.